All right, everybody, welcome to this week's edition of the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and my co-host,
Simone Sheree,
and correspondent,
Kyle Andrew.
All right, so today, y'all know I love having good conversation. I'm trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what's actually going on. So diversity and inclusion is front and center this week. What does it mean? Are we seeing show ponies? Are companies really investing into these officers? Or is it just a game, just for optics? So who better to bring in than the man with the plan, the D&I expert, Dr. Shelton Goode. How's it going, sir?
It's good. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, of course. I need you to see the new space, too. So, I had to floss a little bit when he walked in because, it's kind of what I do. I had to floss a little bit.
You're a show-off.
I have to have my moments.
I love you. You're good.
All right. So, for those that do not know, tell them about you, who you are, what you do, all that good stuff.
Yeah, Shelton Goode, CEO, president of Icarus Consulting. We are a minority and veteran-owned firm specializing in helping companies be just a little bit more diverse, a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more equitable. And we do that through a number of things, training being at the top of the list.
How long have you been doing it?
I've been doing this now. Icarus itself, the company, it's been around since 2012, but I've been doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work since 2000.
So you've seen it all.
I thought I'd seen it all up until 2020, up until this year. I thought I'd seen it all.
Okay, so did we have anything on the rundown? We just want to go straight into it.
Well, we do, but just a little bit different this week because race and culture and diversity are talking points and they are political as well, but it's also just permeating the whole culture and the whole conversation. So I thought we could start with exactly that, with diversity and inclusion and this sort of this boom and this awareness that's happened as a result of everything that's gone on this year. Thought we could talk about that a little bit and then get into all these different policy areas like the sort of mandates for inclusion and what that looks like and kind of go from there. But so before we started, you made a really good point with regard to talking about George Floyd and essentially the public execution that the entire world witnessed and what that brought up. And I think Forbes magazine called it like a diversity and inclusion like a boom, almost like a resurgence, where essentially it seemed like every company that you've ever shopped at, been to, visited, was in your inbox telling you what they were going to do about race and about racism. And I think their talking points, I think, emerge from that as far as companies and people needing to be not just not racist, but anti-racist. And what does that mean? And then there were other conversations about Black lives in particular and the significance of Black lives and all these different outcomes that are so disparate beyond gender or beyond, So I think that became a conversation. And then I think very swiftly after that conversation followed a lot of skepticism from people about what does that really mean? Like we'd see an organization post something on social media about how committed they are and then very quickly see employees and also other folks just kind of chime in and say, hey, well, why is your board completely the opposite of diversity? So maybe we could talk a little bit about that and about what you've seen this year and how it's different, if it's different at all.
Yeah, so perfect place to start. So as I said, I've been doing this for a while, but what is different this year? Obviously, as you said, the public executions, the lynchings of blacks. What we've seen different this year is employee response. What caught me off guard and what caught my team off guard was that even though we had a large percentage of the workforce working virtually, they put a lot of pressure on their companies to take a stand. Now that may not seem like a big deal, but before that, and even going back as recent as 2015-16, when we saw the deaths of Trayvon and Eric and Michael, you didn't have that. And in fact, you had just the opposite. Companies were telling employees, we don't talk about race, religion, whatever happens outside stays outside. You get paid to come here to work. And employees were like, oh, okay. Now, what we saw in 2020 was that you saw the Black Lives Matter and the protest on your television screen. What you may not have seen was that there was an equal and powerful protest of employees going to their companies and saying, what's up? Where do we stand with this? Mm-hmm. What we saw was that companies, in their haste to patronize, and let me keep it real.
By all means.
Patronize and pacify their employees, put out these quick, mealy mouth, that's what my grandma used to call them, mealy mouth statements, saying, Black Lives Matter, diversity is good. And then that fell flat because their employees was, first of all, that's a weak statement. Second of all, you've not done anything up until not everybody, but in a lot of cases, companies had not done anything. And then they put out not only a statement, but a bad statement. That's when my phone started ringing off the hook.
Or maybe there'd even been a history of reports about discrimination or different things like that. And so all of that came to light.
Yeah, of course. The hypocrisy.
Sure.
The hypocrisy. So what companies misread was their employees did not want them. Well, let's broaden it, because it started out with employees, but it quickly went to their vendors, the minority vendors, their shareholders, their customers, external stakeholders, communities. What they expected was action.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they wanted. What are you going to do internally to make your workforce more inclusive, more equitable, more fair, more just? And then once you've earned some internal cred, now you can come out and start helping communities and stuff like that. And again, I don't want to paint all companies with a broad stroke. There's a lot of companies that have been doing some things, and then what they found out was they had to up their game. A lot of them were patting themselves on the back, rightfully so, for a lot of good things they were doing, both for internally, but in the places where they work, live, and play, they were doing some good things. But this kind of hit the reset button, and everybody, regardless of how poorly or how well you had efforts, no matter how good or bad your previous efforts were, you had to take a step back and say, what do we need to do differently going forward?
And to that point, because there was an organization that I was familiar with through a friend who had been consulting for them, doing policy work, which is what I do. However, they didn't even begin to pretend that they had the internal expertise to handle it. And they didn't say, okay, well, the first thing we're going to do is hire a diversity officer because that'll be the person who helps. They said, let's just actually make some phone calls and figure out what would be the best starting point, rather than saying, well, we're just going to hire someone, or we're all going to fix it ourselves, or we're going to ask the board what they want to do. And so they actually took the effort of going outside and saying, you know what, this isn't just a company problem, this is an industry-wide problem. We lack diversity in this entire industry. And quite frankly, maybe there's even more that we could be doing within this industry to make sure that it's more diverse, that goes beyond the community, but just for our actual workforce. So to that credit, I think that I did see some companies who said, before we release a statement, because we know that that's not a good idea, let's just ask a whole bunch of questions and let's make sure our employees are involved. And this organization in particular, they did make sure that their employees were involved. They didn't try to make it behind the closed doors and we'll report back and let you guys know what we decided, sort of a thing.
Yeah.
So do you think that's helpful?
Well, that's ideal. The problem was we were in an era of speed where now there's a expectation that you move faster.
Right.
But you also have to get it right. That's tough. That's tough, especially if you're going from 0 to 60.
Right.
What I would have had them do both. First thing I would have did was I would have hired somebody like Icarus Consulting to say, hey, help us.
I hear you.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
I mean, Forbes said we're one of the best doing this. Why not pick up the phone and say, hey, help me do the statement, while at the same time we think through how what we need to actually do. You can do both. And so that's what I would have advised them to do. I would have advised them to ask their employees. I would have asked them to go to their communities and do what a couple of companies did, which put together an ad hoc sort of diversity board of directors, board of advisors. Help us. How about being a little humble? How about saying we don't have all the answers?
Right.
How about saying we're not good at this? How about saying we don't know what we don't know? And how about some transparency, some vulnerability, and some authenticity?
Yeah.
The problem with that is most companies are managed pretty much still by white males who are drivers. I mean, they get paid to make decisions, solve problems, and do it quickly. And that competency, which was a strength in 2019, is a weakness in 2020 because we need you to listen. We need you to listen.
That's a very good point, yeah.
With empathy. If you're a 50-year-old white male running a successful company, you have no idea. And the reason I can say that, because they asked me. I got a question from a CEO that says, Shelton, help me understand why, when we saw in Atlanta the protests after Rashard Brooks, we saw people looting and burning. What did that have to do with Black Lives Matter? I said, and you know what my response was? Why are you asking me? Do you have black, do you, who are you, are you talking to people that look like the people that were out there? Why don't you go ask them? You understand what I'm saying? And so, you know why? Because he talked to me because he's comfortable with me. You need to go talk to people that are different than you. If you don't know, what was in their mindset. Now, I'm not trying to conflate what we saw at Phipps Plaza with what, but to somebody who doesn't understand and that's what they see on CNN, they're left asking, I'm confused.
Sure.
And I'm afraid to ask somebody what's going on. Does that make any sense?
No, it does.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and to that point, there's always a fear about something like that, right? And there's a fear of looking as uninformed as you are, and sometimes there's a lot of backlash for that. Especially from the culture and you'll hear it all over Twitter all the time. What do you mean you don't know this is a problem? Or there's a lot of frustration with regard to that.
Yes.
And well, I'm glad this is important to you now, and that sort of a thing.
Yes.
Would you say the company needs to be prepared for that exact response and to take that on the chin and to proceed forward?
Yeah. One of my number one advice to CEOs and the people that work for them directly, the boards, is you need to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable. You need to get more comfortable with not having all of the answers. You need to be comfortable with not having all of the solutions. You need to be comfortable just listening. My grandma used to say a long time ago, you need to go someplace and sit down. They wouldn't understand. They wouldn't understand that because they're too busy trying to,
Pick up the ball and run with it. And
make a dollar out of 15 cents. But they need to go somewhere and just sit down and listen.
Can I ask what you would say about corporations in general getting involved in doing something or even leading this effort in a sense, because there's lots of different institutions, and I think a lot of people thought, especially the demographic you're talking about, even if they're not super successful or even if they're not CEOs, maybe they're just middle managers, they really felt like this is a business. We sell hats, or we're a restaurant. We don't do community, and maybe they don't. Maybe they don't have a single drop of community engagement. Maybe they don't have a Boy Scout troop they sponsor. Maybe they're just a business. So what would you say about a company who has that perspective, or even customers who have that perspective of, well, I don't want to see Black Lives Matter when I'm shopping on Amazon, which, first of all, Jeff Bezos. Shout out to Jeff Bezos, made an incredible.
What we not about to do? We are not about to shout out Jeff Bezos. We're not doing that. We are not.
But an incredible response to that statement.
Incredible.
Oh my God.
Here we go.
Oh my God.
Incredible.
His response.
But for me, I'm a customer that way. Like, I was getting emails like just from H&M Express, Sam's Club, Costco's, and it's just like I don't necessarily need you to make a response, to respond to this. So for me, it's like,
right.
Do they feel like they have to? Obviously they're scared of losing money, but I felt like it was a little bit overwhelming for me because it kind of didn't feel genuine.
Now that's what I think that's the point. It's not just I don't want to see a response. I want to see it has to be genuine. It has to feel genuine and not patronizing or pacifying.
Sure.
That's I think you can't expect a company can't afford to appear to be tone deaf. They can't afford to appear business as usual because it's not. So what you have to do then is say, okay, so what does that mean going forward? And it's got to mean more than just simply putting a sign in the window or a sticker on the door that says Black Lives Matter. You understand? You understand what I'm saying?
For sure. So for those customers who felt like, and I remember this response because it was on Twitter, was specifically that Black Lives Matter is a whatever, maybe it's a socialist organization or something like that.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have to see that when I'm about to spend my money on your website. And I think his response was something to the effect of, I'm happy to lose you as a customer and don't worry about our website.
Yeah.
And so I think my kind of question there was, there's not always going to be like that dividing line of, okay, do I need to lose this amount of business? But to the extent that folks do feel like, whether they're professionals or not, business should just be business, or football should just be football. How do you get through across to
I think that's an artificial choice. You cannot be a business today, nor in the past. So let's be clear about that. You can't. Although companies may have told your employees that you can't talk about this stuff. You cannot be. There's not a Fortune 500 company that doesn't have a corporate social responsibility function.
That's true.
You can't.
That's true.
Whether it's the environment, whether it's ecological, whether it's social justice, education, you cannot segment yourself off from the people you're trying to sell products to. You have to sell them products that are safe. You have to sell them products that are equitable. So let me give you, you're in policy. I was Chief Diversity Officer at MARTA.
Okay.
Do you know what the number one issue that I had two issues I had to deal with? The perception that of the billions of dollars that MARTA gave out in contracts, that there wasn't a fair share of those contracts that went to small, disadvantaged, minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned, LGBTQ, disability. And you're a public transit, you can't have that perception.
Okay.
You can't even have it as a reality, but you can't even have it as a perception. My second complaint was, why aren't the elevators and the escalators at College Park working? They work at Buckhead. Why are the bathrooms, closed at, 5 Points? They're not closed in, Dunwoody. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
These are, and it's whether they're perception or reality. You can't operate any organization, nonprofits, and we talked about this on the last show, for-profit, privately owned shareholder, without understanding that you have a responsibility to be a corporate citizen in the places where you live, work, and play. And I say that because here in Atlanta, as we know, just look outside. More and more people are consciously locating businesses in communities where where people can go out and have a life and work, and the people will also live in that. So you have, if you're gonna, how can I say, take from the community, you got to give something back.
So this is because I saw an article where Google was giving their employees like $2,500 toward their student loan debt. Yes. And one of my LinkedIn friends made a thing about it, because she was like, okay, her point was that companies are kind of hiding behind the term diversity.
Yes.
Because diversity is not specific to one group. It's
right.
Women. It's like you just said,
right.
Women, LGBT, Black. Right now, the space we're in, we're talking specifically about African Americans.
Right.
So how do we get around that? Like, how do we deal with that?
You deal with it by dealing with the reality and the truth. For years, particularly the last 5 to 7 years, diversity, people would say diversity, and then they would follow it with a disclaimer. And by that I mean not just race and gender. That's what we've been saying for 5 to 7 years, to make sure that we meant education, diversity of thought, identity, and everything else. So we had to almost have a disclaimer that it wasn't just about race. And look at where we are. Look at where we are now. You have people that still do not understand the concept that behind why you have to say Black Lives Matter. You don't try. What I would say to my clients, we don't try to tiptoe around it. That is where we need to put the focus. If this was an issue about children, it would have to be an issue. We had to deal with that issue. If it was about religion, we'd have to deal with that. If it's about nationality or immigration status, you deal with that. And so I, for one, am glad that we've got that back into the conversation. Because for years, we've seen people try to create new words to run away from it. Oh, it's not about diversity, meaning it's not about race. That's what that was the unwritten, what was the subliminal message. It's about inclusion. It's about belonging. It's about
So can you talk about those a little bit, like comparing those and and just breaking down those two terms, because you hear them clumped together more often than separate now.
So that's kind of my question. Like, are we going to have to force companies to take a stand on every issue and not just lump everything into diversity? So it's going to be Black Lives Matter. It's going to be LGBTQ. Like, you have to take a stand on each one of these issues and not just say, well, we're doing a diversity and inclusion officer who's going to handle all of this. Is that ultimately where we're headed? They're going to have to take stands on all these distinctive classes of peoples and issues.
No, what they have to do is go back to what this was all about from the very first beginning. Is making sure that you have a workplace, that people can come to work every day, and regardless of the difference that they bring into the workplace. Now, again, I'm going to put a caveat on that in a second. If they come into the workplace and they say, okay, we understand the values, we understand the policies, I want to come here every day, I want to be safe, I want to be treated with respect, I want to be valued for working all of the hours I do, I want to be recognized and rewarded for my contributions, I want to be treated fair, and oh, by the way, if I do all of that, I should be able to see myself being able to advance so that I can contribute more. And you say, well, that sounds so simple. Well, if it was so simple, why do you have companies in Atlanta where we have a substantial a workforce of people of color and women, but you don't see them represented, particularly in the leadership of those companies?
I think that's what Frank said. It was like 4% of CEOs are minority in Atlanta. I'm like, how is that possible when?
Because there are barriers. And these barriers show up both organizationally and they show up individually. Can I share with you a quick example?
I was going to say, please.
I can't say the company, but I was at a company and we were interviewing for an engineer. So we interviewed 5 great candidates. At the end, we're sitting around discussing the candidates. And the hiring manager says, well, so the group had come to a consensus. It was between 2 candidates. One was an African-American female. One was a white male. The hiring manager said, well, I like the female candidate, but she went to Spelman.
Oh.
And this is in Atlanta. She went to Spelman. And then as everybody looked at him and says, well, and I'm the facilitator of the conversation.
Right.
So I says, say more about that. Well, I'm not sure Spelman is really a good school. I kind of like the other candidate because he went to Georgia Tech and got his mechanical engineering degree from Georgia Tech. Somebody on the panel, and it happened to be a white female, raised her hand and says, are you not aware that Spelman has an engineering program, a joint program with Georgia Tech? And if you go to Spelman and you want to be a mechanical engineer, guess where you take all your engineering classes?
Right.
At Georgia Tech. So her engineering degree and his engineering degree is the same course. She just has her diploma from Spelman and his from Georgia Tech. Oh, by the way, you do know Spelman is one of the top schools.
Right.
Now, how can you be, you say, well, gosh, he didn't mean anything, but how can you be in Atlanta?
Literally in Atlanta.
We're not talking about being in Wisconsin. How can you be in Atlanta and not know that? Because his bias was, I went to Georgia Tech. So, gosh, this guy reminds me of me. You understand what I'm saying? And so now you pass over what could be a future vice president at that company.
Sure.
Obviously, well, the story at the end of the story is he did wind up hiring the female candidate, but not because she was a female or she was a female of color, because she was a person that could do the doggone job. And she's just so, you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
But his biases prevented him from seeing that. And those biases show up if you have not the wrong name, but if you have a certain name on a resume, you may not get.
Oh yeah, that's
you may not even get an interview.
Been a thing.
You show up at an interview, 6 to 8 months pregnant, you may not get the job. I can go on and on to tell you how biases prevent qualified superstars from getting hired, promoted, and developed because of individual biases.
Sure.
That's why that's why there's companies like me exist, to say, let me help you understand what you don't, this blind spot you don't see. And everybody knows what the blind spot is in a car. If you don't turn around and look, you won't see that car that's in your blind spot. That's what we try to help people do, is help people understand blind spots.
So that segues to the role of a chief diversity officer?
Right.
What is it their role to kind of be what you did to facilitate and make sure that those kinds of conversations have those segues where the lady was like, or you were there to facilitate to make sure that there are not these biases sitting in these rooms constantly? Is that the job of a chief diversity officer?
The job of a person hired to lead the diversity efforts in the company, their primary job is to make sure that leadership approaches what I just said from a business perspective. To understand this is not something that's nice to do. This is not something we're asking you to do that's extra. We're telling you this is what you need to do to help make this company continue to be successful. The diversity officers that cannot do that don't understand the business, their business, that don't understand the industry that their business is in, cannot talk credibly with the people that they are sitting around the table with. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And some of these hires, when I watch every hire that pops up on LinkedIn or whatever, the first thing I do is I don't look at the person's gender or race. I look at, tell me what has prepared you to do this job. And then I look to see, oh, this person was in marketing. Not to say, this person was in sales. This person was in, and I'm like, what? Help me understand what prepared you to be able to do it. And you can say, well, they come into the table with the business savvy. All right, so help me understand, where did you get your diversity chops from? Where did you get your diversity chops from? So,
to that point, so why isn't this an extension of human resources, or people? Because now
it is
like director of people. So why a specific role for diversity if there's a people manager or culture director?
Because if you don't have somebody that wakes up every day thinking about it, if you in the HR organization doing what they're thinking about, making sure we get people in, making sure we pay them, making sure they get their total rewards, benefits, all of that, making sure that we can keep them satisfied so that they don't leave and we don't have to replace them. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay.
That's what that's what gets all of the focus.
Okay.
Thinking about every day, is there any policies, practices, processes, behaviors that interfere with making sure that create barriers for people to come in here and be treated with dignity, respect, value, equity? Can I share another quick example with you? I had a chief human resources officer call me and say, we was just catching up. She says, oh my gosh, I'm going through it. Well, I said, tell me what's happening. Well, we're trying to keep everybody employed. We're trying to keep the doors open, trying to, whatever. She says, I'm going to recommend to the CEO that we have a 20% across the board pay cut. And I said, why would you do that? And she said, what's wrong with that? I'm trying to, I don't want to have any head count. I says 20% across the board. I says, so you, a person that makes over $700,000, you want a person that's at your customer service center, single female, keeping her kid home because she doesn't want to send her to school, having to pay extra for childcare. She only makes 79 cents for every dollar that her male counterpart makes. She makes less than $15 an hour. Now you're going to go tell her she got to take a 20% pay cut. And you're the chief human resources officer? You understand what I'm saying?
As opposed to absorbing it
instead of saying, well, let's think about what's the most equitable way to do this. The people at the top could probably afford the 20%.
I see, okay.
The people right under them could probably afford 15%.
Okay.
Maybe the people under them, 10%. And let's protect the people.
Level it out.
The people that make $13.87 an hour. Let's not have them take a 20% pay cut.
Gotcha.
You understand? Equity. Equity. HR people look at processes.
Sure.
We got to just have a pay cut.
Right. Well, so that's my question too, because when I think about this, I think about discrimination or reports of discrimination, which a lot of times are very revealing and are not necessarily public, let alone public knowledge, other employee knowledge. Other employees don't necessarily know when there's been a report of discrimination somewhere. And sometimes those are very frequent. And then there's a question of how those things are handled. And those usually go straight to human resources, right? So whether it's someone called a name or something else. So and within the workplace, in my mind, so many of these functions do involve like the day-to-day process of that company, the way people are treated in that company. So how, even if there's two different roles, don't they have to work pretty closely together? Because,
absolutely.
And even for the recruiting part. And
Absolutely. If diversity is doing their job, then you have an environment where everybody's treated with respect. Nobody's calling anybody out of their name. Nobody's treating them unfair. But when they do, because occasionally you're going to have a knucklehead, right? And the person that's the victim of that behavior and treatment needs to know, I can report it. I have an obligation to report it. And I feel confident that they're going to listen to me. I'm confident they're going to look into it, and they're going to take the appropriate action. And so then obviously they report it, and then someone in HR takes it from there. Because like I said, you hopefully would have an environment where you have fewer cases. But when you do, they have to be dealt with.
So
unfortunately, you can't publicize that.
Well, right. So that's what I was going to ask. So, like, what happens, like, culture-wise, amongst the staff, if anyone knows, right? Or maybe it's just that employee, whoever was the recipient of the discrimination. Is the best only correct action always a termination of that individual? And if it's not, then how do you ensure how does that person feel respected or protected in that company?
So what generally happens is the incident is kept within a very small circle of people. The perpetrator of the behavior or the incident, the victim, HR, and the victim's manager, and the perpetrator's manager. So you got a small circle. So that incident is handled consistently with company policy. First offense, maybe it's a written warning. Second or third offense could be termination. But that's handled. Where HR in the best companies, what they do is they start seeing, they have early warning signs, and when they start seeing an uptick all of a sudden of inappropriate behavior, maybe because people are under stress, maybe because people are feeling a certain kind of way about, then what they do, they should contact their diversity officer and say, we need to put together a strategy because we're seeing an uptick. And then you look at a full menu of options. Maybe the CEO has a town hall and says, guys, I know everybody's feeling a certain kind of way, but let's not forget, we have values here. Here are the things that is important to us. Let's remember to treat each other, or maybe it's some manager training. I don't know, but or maybe it's all of it. But that's where HR and diversity talks together, so that you don't have that trending uptick become all of a sudden an internal crisis or epidemic.
So what I've heard about as far as being anti-racist, that term now, is a lot of bystander training or calls about bystander training, because employees will say every once in a while that they have heard something. And it's not always the person who's the victim who's going to report it. They don't always want to report it. They don't always want to ruffle more feathers. Or maybe, in their mind, they're just trying to move on with it. They don't know what's going to happen. They'd rather not report it. But how does that work? And then maybe we can kind of open it up, and I'd like to ask
so discrimination, racism, retaliation, bullying, those are the big ones. Because those things are also against the law. There are local, state, and federal laws. I will tell you, in a workplace, it's usually not those big things. It's usually the little things. They're not little.
Microaggressions.
They're not little, because the person that is like, well, wait a minute. Every time you have a meeting about a client, I'm not invited. Why is that? Or when it's a certain client that happens to look like me, you only invite me to those. You see what I'm saying? Things like that where you say, what's going on? Why am I being treated so different? And I feel this way about it. Can somebody help me understand? It's usually those 1,000 cuts. It's usually not the big things. This whole thing about racism and systemic racism and then anti-racism, let's have a segue.
So that's what I was going to ask is, so for bystander purposes, a lot of people, again, in the company, especially the one I was referring to earlier, there was mostly people who were not the victim who felt like they wanted to call, which was an anonymous tip line, and report an incident. And it just kind of makes you think, okay, so people who are on the receiving end are not always the people who feel comfortable speaking up and saying that bothers them. Maybe they don't want to appear overly sensitive.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
You know what I mean? So maybe that's the case. But how likely, like, should that be like a company policy? How likely should people be? How, you know, like, because what have you, and you've had lots of jobs too. So I was just going to ask, like, have you ever witnessed or been the victim of, and like, how did you handle it? How was it handled? Maybe you could explain.
Well, you know, I'm bold. So I don't. I've always been bold. It doesn't matter whether it's an operations level, whether it's a leadership level. I've always been bold. So I'm going to who it matters, who actually can make the difference. But a segue, because kind of what we're talking about. I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and he said something I didn't really think about it, and we were talking about Trump and what we're seeing. And the notion was, okay, we've thought for years that all these bigots and racists were kind of dead. And now we're seeing like a resurgence. It's just like, wait. So y'all have been in power for the last 20, 30 years, and we're thinking we've moved this needle so far over, and now we're seeing we're barely at the middle. So listening to this conversation, I guess my question is, are we still fighting the same battle, which is we're still not in the appropriate rooms to make sure that stuff like the example you used of the black lady, and are we still not in those rooms? And if not, how do we finally get and stay in those rooms?
Yeah, I wish I had a magic answer for you. The answer to your question is we still are not in those rooms in a critical mass to be able to shape policies and things like that. And how we get there, I wish I had a single answer for you. I don't know. I can tell you what we can't afford to do. We can't afford to be, like you say, be bold. We can't shirk. We can't shy away. And I know a lot of people will say, "Well, I'm just trying to keep my job. I'm just trying to get paid."
So, as a minority, like that's the question I'm asking. How would you feel if someone reported an incident that you were maybe somebody said something, and your
called in,
and your ally coworker, says,
to
"Hey,
recall the situation."
Right? Like, would you feel protected if that happened, or would you feel like, why is somebody reporting something that I didn't report? Like,
I think that goes back to what he was saying, though. A lot of times, especially if we're talking at the operations level, where people are making $10 to $12, and they're trying, especially now, they're trying to feed 3 and 4 kids. I don't want the heat. So if I didn't report it, why are you reporting it?
Because they don't have any choice. In most companies, 50% of the concerns and complaints that are filed by observers.
Right.
Somebody that was in the room.
And I think companies encourage that because
that's the policy.
So
they don't encourage it. They make it required
true.
that if we investigate and we find out that she was treated a certain way, which is a violation of company policy, they make you.
How would you feel, Kyle?
Yeah.
I'm sitting here trying to figure it out because a lot of the times I have a motto where I just mind my business.
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoy my
That's why I wanted
business.
to ask because I figured that was exactly what you were going to say. So.
However, if I was a victim of some prejudice or racist act and somebody else, like a coworker, decided to say something, I would feel like I work with somebody who cares and wants to see change. However, it's different depending on how the company decides to handle it.
Yep.
I feel like you want to say I work with a snitch. Like I feel like that's what you want to say. That I work with a snitch.
If you're the perp, maybe, but he's not the perp.
But I guess my question is, if that happens and we do, because there has to be the interview, and I don't want to call it interrogation, but it ultimately turns into the investigation, and I don't really want to talk about it. Does it really help? Because I don't want to talk about. I don't really want to give you the details. So now you're telling me, you're feeding me what was told to you, but it was my situation. But I don't want to get into it.
I think that's part of the diversity and inclusion challenge is that when there are minorities in these spaces, they don't always want to be the minority in that space. Yeah. And quite frankly, there could be a situation where in a company, half of the clientele is Spanish speaking. But there's no Spanish emergency instructions, there's no Spanish signs, and so the employees kind of feel like, hey, this isn't really diverse, and they look over at there maybe one Latino employee, and he doesn't want to have to be the person to lead, the initiative to shake things up, but so then nothing ever changes because they're ignorant, and they need somebody to be honestly the black person right now, or I need you to be the woman right now, or I need you to be the queer person right now.
Yeah. Which makes them feel like, I'm just happy to be here.
But so sometimes,
so I don't want to shake the table because I'm happy to be
here. So
are
minorities sometimes accomplices in this, accomplices in keeping things as homogenous as they are because they're not willing to, they don't want to be minorities in a professional setting. They want to go to work and just be these blank canvases that don't have to be gay or black or over 65 or whatever.
I have been in a scenario where, I work with a lot of people from Afghanistan, Their English is not the best, and they're in classes learning the English language and things like that. And I work at a hotel, so the guest was just kind of getting frustrated because he couldn't really understand, and he said some things that he shouldn't have said. But me personally, me being who I am, I'm not going to take it to a manager because I'm the supervisor. So like, I just asked the guest. I told him, I explained the situation, said he's not from here. He really doesn't speak the best of English. My manager is also Afghanistan, so I assume that's how he got the job. Now it's just like, just don't speak to him that way. And I decided not to take it to the manager because I feel like it was handled. But at the same time, he has like 3 or 4 kids. In their culture, their wives don't work, and so I always say, if I was on that show, watch what would you do with the guy. I would always be the person to say something because I don't, it infuriates me. You can disrespect me, but don't disrespect somebody else. I would say something.
So then why didn't you tell the manager? Is it because you didn't trust the company would do the right thing?
But kind of because of like what we're talking about now, I know that if it goes any higher to like an HR exec or whatever, then it turn into some other big thing. And I don't know. Again, thoroughly enjoy minding my business, but I stand up for people when I see fit.
I mean, again, I feel like we come back to the same place about being in the important rooms. You know, the fact that there's only 4%, I think it was 4% of African American, or actually, no, I'm going to say African American because we're in Atlanta. African American CEOs, when a lot of their headquarters are here. How do we fix that particular problem? Like, where does it start? Because when you look at it, it's like looking at a mountain. And you're just like, okay, we've been chipping away at it, but now that we've seen this new administration and we realize that all of y'all are still here and still in power, we really literally have only been chipping away at this mountain. How do we take down this mountain?
Yeah, that's you got the boards that make these hires. Shareholders have to put pressure on them.
So you mentioned bias, right? That's one reason. But what about, is there ever just, the pool is just not deep enough? There's never just a shallow pool issue?
No. The pool
one of the things that I would challenge that on is that one of the companies I was talking about earlier was a ski resort. And not just skiing, but snow sports in general are very homogenous. There are not, especially when it comes to Black Americans, there are not a lot of Black people in the snow sports industry, period. Whether athletic, recreational, it's an expensive hobby for one, and let alone people who have a love enough for it to want to work and make it their career. So, I mean, in that situation, I felt like when people say there's not a big pool, I tend to believe that. I mean, I did even just a little anecdotal poll to my family, my friends, and would you come to this ski lodge with me? Would you go skiing? What? It was just like a resounding.
They probably said Black folks don't ski.
Yeah.
No.
Let's be very clear. They probably said Black folks don't ski.
And that's cold, right? I don't want to be cold. And my mom said, she was asking me, well, do they have cabins? Because I'll go to the cabin and put my feet in front of the fire. Like, I want to do a cabin. But so maybe sometimes there aren't pools. Or should we always be skeptical about that? Or sometimes maybe there's just legit no pool. We're not in line to operate in some industries.
Well, let me ask this question because everybody's here. So do we think that cancel culture can help with that? It's like when the CEO of Wells Fargo stood up and said basically that the pool isn't big enough to find diverse talent, and people kind of canceled and was like, "No, bro, we're not about to hear that." So that's not true.
Not for Wells Fargo.
Exactly. Bro, they're lining up out the door to get into banking. Are you serious? I have an MBA, so we're not about to hear that. Cancel culture kind of came and was like, "No, that's not cool. We're not about it." So is cancel culture our friend? Can it be our friend to help tackle this mountain?
It can be. I feel like it's used in the wrong ways.
Yeah,
elaborate.
It's abused.
It's if somebody makes okay.
I know that face.
Okay. I know that. So I'm gonna go into politics. I don't discriminate against people because they have different views than me. However, if a celebrity or somebody, a company, say H&M decides that they want to support Trump, then everybody's gonna cancel them because they feel like, oh, I'm a Democrat or Trump did this and that and the other. I don't want to support you anymore. And I mean, like, you have that right, but I don't want to cancel somebody because of their views. You're right. You're allowed to have that view. That's how I feel.
And it can get very personal and very silly as well.
Exactly. Even with Kanye, if he wants to support
it all
Trump,
comes back to Kanye. I knew it was coming.
Or 50 Cent, or Ice Cube.
You have Jeff Bezos. You have Kanye West. It always comes back to Kanye West.
You cannot persecute that man
back
for
to
who
Kanye
he wants
West.
to support. You just can't do it. It's not.
But that's a question. I think. What about numbers? Like I like seeing numbers. So when I had this conversation, they said, listen. Like, this is the number of applications that we get for these positions, however many hundred there were. This is how many met the requirements. Well, first they said this is how many people of color, period. Then they were like, how many people met the requirements? And the numbers didn't necessarily change so much, but there just were not very many. And it's like, so does every company that has that issue need to invest in increasing a pipeline? Do they need to invest in, like, education, workforce development. Like, what do they need to do if the pool really isn't there? And I'm sure it can always be bigger anyway, because there are certain careers that just don't occur to certain people. I don't think a lot of people have thought about,
the frustrating thing to me, because I'm 40, the frustrating thing to me is we've had this conversation for the last 20 years.
You don't want to work at a ski resort either.
We've literally, and you know this, we've literally had this same conversation for the last 30 years. Have we moved at all? Like, I'm really starting to wonder, have we moved at all? What you just said, I've heard that come verbatim. We've heard this verbatim.
Yeah.
How do we get past that? Okay, we keep saying we need a pool. All right, well, we have HBCUs that in my mind are supposed to help fill that pool because they're supposed to create education and opportunities for us through education. Okay, we have HBCUs, but now they're struggling, so that's a whole other conversation that we're having to revisit. All right, so that's one area that we're kind of bleeding in. So then it becomes, you have a Wells Fargo CEO that says the pool is not big enough, which actually, let me hold off. What did you say when you heard that?
You don't want to know.
Actually, I do. I want to know what you said.
Well, I got to be careful because I'm actually talking to Wells Fargo on Monday.
Oh, okay. Well,
but here.
What was your thought process?
Not at liberty.
Wow, why didn't you pick up the phone and call me? Which no.
That's fair.
No, seriously. That's what I said, and guess what they did? They picked up the phone and called me. So I'm talking to them on Monday, literally. But to both of you guys' questions, you say you're a numbers person. I'm a action and results person. What I want to know is, are you going to the places to look for it? Are you really doing something different to go find the talent? Are you enlisting help? Are you enlisting the help of black recruiters and executives to help you? Or are you just trying to do it on your own? Are you using your internal employees to help you? What are you doing different? So then the next, you say you're a numbers person. If you're doing something different, then I expect to see something show up in your applicant pool. I want to see that you've got more people that now know about your opportunities that knew before. And I want to see that pool look different. Now, as a result of that pool, I want to see who you're interviewing. I'm expecting to see the numbers look different than they did a year ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. I'm looking to see who gets hired. And I'm not telling you got to do this or you got to do that or you got to hire six. But I'm expecting to see at some point something different. I don't want to stop there. I want to see who's getting promoted.
Right. Longevity.
You want to know how people want to get to the top? I want to see how many people, and then what are you doing to help them get promoted? Are you investing in them? Are you mentoring them? Are you developing them? Then when they're ready, are you giving them a fair shot? There's only so many positions at the top.
Right.
That's what I want to see. I want to do something different. And if you say, well, I don't know what to do, then, of course, shameless plug, you pick up the phone, you call me.
Right. So can I ask about one thing as well? So as far as mandates, right? It's one thing, I think, for a board or leadership to get together and say, we're gonna hire somebody who can help us to get this done. We're gonna come up with a plan. But what about mandates, which are popping up in different states? Are those helpful? Are those hurtful? You need to have a woman on your board. You need to have
No. I got to have a piece of this.
Please.
Let's not talk about that mandate. Everybody wants to talk about that mandate. Let's talk about the one that came from 1600 Pennsylvania that says if you're a federal contractor or subcontractor, you can't do diversity training.
Well, true.
Let's talk about that.
I was going to dance around that, but since you want to go right into
Let's talk about that mandate.
But I want to talk about all of them. I do want to talk about all of them because there also was the idea, and this is previously, that either the training had to be there or that you had to make an attempt to have some sort of a diverse, whether it was for your contractors or something like that. Like the investment in the pipeline had to be there, had to be at least evidentiary. Yes. But to the extent that companies want to get better, is it helpful? Is it helpful to have a mandate, and then maybe we could talk about the not being able to do it?
Let's just pull the crap from under the rug. The real question is.
I have questions about both.
Here's the real question. Let's pull the crap from under the rug.
How would you
The real question is: do we need a new variation of affirmative action? That's the real question. Do we need a new variation of affirmative action that says?
Do we like affirmative action?
Well,
Is that a good thing?
I don't really
affirmative
think it's a matter of do we like it. The question
Is it helpful?
That's the question. Will a new variation of affirmative action?
No, does the current variation, is it helpful?
I mean, I don't
A lot
know.
of people
are we
do
still
not
even
like
using
it.
Are we
A lot
still
of
really
people-
using it?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Then how we get here then?
Because
How we go backward
affirmative
if it's
action
still in place?
is discrimination prevention. Discrimination is very difficult to prove when it comes to things like talent and recruiting and hiring. It's very, very difficult.
Well, what if we attach? You're a number person. What if we attach that to numbers? That says, okay, if your company has 5,000 employees, and we do some kind of mathematical number that comes up with some kind of equation that at least starts a decent conversation.
Every once in a while, people do, and they win those lawsuits. But it doesn't change. It doesn't change every company. It's an individual incident. That person's going to be compensated because you discriminated against them in your attempt to hire them. But it doesn't make the company diverse all of a sudden.
I mean,
but it's a mandate. So is that helpful? Is it helpful to the internal culture of that company?
So to answer your question, if you was to look on your phone right now, one of the top news stories, Wall Street Journal, Microsoft falls short of its diversity goal. It's one of the top stories because they pledged to double their workforce. That they were never going to be able to do that.
So they aim too high.
So they created their own nightmare. What I have found in my research is that when it is narrowly tailored and there's a compelling reason, mandates help for that particular company, organization, or industry. Narrowly tailored, and there is a compelling again, let me give you an example. There was an electric company that I worked for that wanted to hire a nuclear engineer. Now, I know what you're going to say, man, the pool for that can't be that big, especially when it comes to women and people of color. So we went through extraordinary efforts to present to the hiring manager qualified candidates that hopefully a slate that would include females and people of color. We presented 18 slates. 18. All 18 had at least one person of color and one female. In 18 out of 18, they hired the white male. Now, that's when they called me and said, something's wrong. Something is happening here. And I went to the chief nuclear officer and says, you didn't have to call the numbers. 18 out of 18? The white male can't be the most.
Even if you closed your eyes and picked, you think you'd land on them.
Yeah. I said,
okay, probability.
And I said, now let me give you 2 slates. And I gave him. This is where you got to get past numbers. Here is the slate of candidates for this one job. One of them included a female who had a master's degree in nuclear engineering from MIT.
Ridiculous.
She was in the Navy. Now, she was on a nuclear submarine. Now, your audience may not know this, but she was a master chief, which is the highest enlisted rank you can achieve in the United States Navy. She was the man on that nuclear sub.
Yeah.
She left the Navy and they passed her over.
What do you say? She was overqualified?
I don't even.
That's the other one.
What I'm saying is, in 18 out of 18 cases, you said you like numbers. The white male was a successful candidate, and in one of those cases, you passed over a person with a degree from MIT. That's when you have to step in and say, okay. They say, Doc, how are we going to fix this? Now, every slate is going to have a female and person of color, and every slate has to be approved by the chief nuclear officer.
Right.
We didn't even impose a number. We just had to have an intervention into the process.
Seriously, yeah.
That says, now we're going to put it on you, the person that gets paid 7 figures, to say, you have to prove for this job classification, you have to prove every hire.
Gotcha.
So we didn't even now if that doesn't work, then the OFCCP is going to jump in and probably say, you know what?
Yeah.
We for every 3 hires, one is going to have to be a person of color or a woman. Now the federal government is going to jump in and say, you are a federal contractor. It is something, we don't know what you're doing, but we're going to tell you what the fix is going to be. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And I have seen, you say, well, that's just a one-off case.
Well, no, I hear you.
No.
And like that sounds like a very concentrated effort.
Whether it has to be contracts, like I saw at MARTA, or at other or whether it's hiring or promotions, you have to be open to doing something that some party would call a quota or a mandate. I call it an intervention, because your normal process
is biased.
I could use a stronger word.
By all means. By all means. That was the first thing that came to me. But if you have a stronger word, by all means, use it. I mean, okay, so I'm listening to the example that you two kind of build off each other about the hiring process itself, the onboarding process, and not only stopping there, but the ladder that they can utilize to properly make sure that people of color or minorities get into these positions. So basically, we need an oversight committee. That's what I'm hearing. We need like an actual minority oversight committee. That's all they do.
Or the diversity officer, I guess.
Which I guess that's the end all question for me. Is the chief diversity officer, when they're hired and put in this position, is this the person that we look to really make change?
Yes. Them in partnership with HR, the person that's over HR, yes. The answer to that question is an unequivocal yes.
Okay. What do they need to be endowed with to get that job done, though? Because it can't just be a matter of me hiring you and putting there and saying kind of go for it. What do they need to be endowed with?
Guts to say, I may lose my job by doing the right thing.
By doing your job?
By doing your job. Yes. Wow. Yes.
But so to that point though,
these are well-paid people.
Yeah.
They are. And I've heard people say, like, I was hired to do this and all they wanted me to do was sit on the posters and on the panels, and so I left. Yes. However, for that purpose, why are there so many NDAs? One of the articles also, I think it was out of the Wall Street Journal this morning, was that NDAs are going to start being removed from all of these diversity and action plans and reports of racial discrimination, et cetera, because for the public's purposes, there's a lot that you will not know, and even for other employees' purposes that you just won't know. Yep. You know, if you're in a company where there's all kind of racism going on, but it stays within that person and their manager, you won't know that you're working in a place like that. You may not want to. Why the shield of protection? Is that like maybe that's what needs to be lifted as well, and maybe that would be helpful.
That's a good question. That's on my own response. That's good. Transparency. If you had greater transparency, you would have different results.
I'm sure. Different pay for sure. Sitting at the same table, we're knowing how much you make and how much you make.
I just want to punch some people. I'm just like,
well, but you know what? Can I take a minute to give a shout out to our own Zaninga Shaw at Starbucks and the amazing job she's doing up there. She just at Starbucks, they just tied their diversity progress to executive pay. So Zaninga, shout out to you at Starbucks, working up there with my homegirl Rosalind Brewer. Now, you want to see some change take place? Tie it to people's money.
Yeah.
It's very important, yeah.
Very. All right.
Starbucks.
So we're down to... I don't know what's worse, that or Jeff Bezos. You get on my nerves. You just get on my nerves. All right, so we're down to the last couple of seconds. So any tidbits as it pertains to diversity and inclusion for those who may be sitting in an office and feel like they're a show pony, or those who aspire to get to that position? Any tidbits?
Yeah, so the same thing I recommended in my book, Diversity Managers, Angels of Mercy or Barbarians at the Gate. Do your job. And I know this is what they're saying to me. Doc, I'm trying to fight the fights that I can win. And my response is fight the fights that need fighting. And if that means at the end of the day you have to go find a new employer, then go find a new employer. Fight the fights that need fighting.
How do people get in touch with you?
You can follow me on LinkedIn, or better yet, you can go to my fabulous website, www.icarusconsult, all one word, .net, and or they can contact you. And,
Whoa! I work for you now? Wait a minute. I work for you now? Jeez, I got a job today. I really got a job today.
I knew he would love that. I know he would love that.
Kyle, final thoughts?
I couldn't resist. I'm sorry.
That was a good one.
No final thoughts. I knew that there was issues within like HR and executive positions at the top, but you gave a lot of insight today. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you for having me.
For sure. Only try to be more like Ricardo. Try to be that whistleblower. When you see an incident, you may be the only person there to report it. Be bold.
Bold and brash. Sometimes you have to live by the ideology. All right, special thanks to our guest today, Dr. Shelton Goode, for being back with us again and breaking this. I get a headache from just this kind of stuff. I get a headache. All right, so on next Friday, we are having our election prep episode where it's going to be me, Simone, Maya's coming back, and Shelly Winter from 95.5 will be with us next Friday. It's going to be... we're getting you ready for the election. All the things you're going to see when you see that ballot outside of the candidates. What else are you going to see when you get in that booth? Because we're usually surprised by it. You won't be surprised this go around because that's what we're going to get into next week. Excellent. So we will see you guys next Friday, same time, same place on the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice. Yeah, that's another conversation.
So,
all right, so let's
you ready?
do these mic checks and see how everybody sounds.
Look at you, man. It's like...
I told you. I'm all the way up.
I'm Shelton, man. I'm sorry. Hey, did you go to the other? Did you ever go to the other spot?
Yeah, he was with us.
Okay, all right.
I understand.
So no disrespect. But come on, bro. You didn't come up a little bit.
Well, when the doctor tells you that, then you know you're doing something.
You didn't came up a little bit. Man.
I told you I was
this is about as good as WCLK, man.
Oh, the new running lines. Everybody like, oh my God, you like Steve Harvey and all them. No. This is me. This is Ricardo. Like this is Leadership Blend.
I didn't been to NPR and WCL. I'm like, okay, look at you. You got Mike. You got a producer.
So you were doing the most. You were doing the most.
He already realized you got to have an excellent co-host and stuff like that.
Oh, you know, look,
he already cracked that code.
She ride or die, like, you know, and then we got Kyle, so we grooming him to get him to do what he would need to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, we
already cracked that code.
We getting this thing going. All right, Kyle, talking to yours.
All right, let me
Testing.
You sound good to me.
All right, Sean, talking to yours.
Testing 1 2.
Testing 1 2.
Okay. You okay? Oh, good Lord. Yeah, I look at
You can't let nobody play nothing off.
I mean,
You had to put the man out there.
had he not done that, I wouldn't even notice it. The fact he tried to play it off is what got him busted. All right, I'm ready when you are, sir.
Okay.
I'll talk this way.
Oh.